A Purple Heart veteran in a wheelchair rolls into a cafe, and they refuse to serve her. They laugh, they mock her, they say she's just a beggar in uniform. But 10 minutes later, the military storms in. The cafe is shut down. And the truth? It's more explosive than anyone could imagine, because this wasn't just some old woman looking for a meal. This was a silent storm, a decorated hero with authority no one saw coming. What happens when the person you pushed out is the one holding your future in her hands? Your comments remind me that we're not alone in feeling deeply. If loyalty, second chances, and human dignity mean something to you, then you're right where you belong. The autumn sun cast long shadows through the tall windows of Goldwater Café as Colonel Marissa Hartwell guided her wheelchair through the entrance. The lunch crowd buzzed with conversation and the clinking of silverware, creating a symphony of everyday life that brought a small smile to her weathered face. With practiced precision, Marissa maneuvered between the tables, her strong shoulders and straight posture reflecting years of military discipline. Her silver-gray hair was neatly styled, and her steely blue eyes took in every detail of her surroundings, with the sharp attention that had served her well during her years of service. The Purple Heart pin on her crisp navy blazer caught the light, drawing respectful glances from other patrons. A young Marine at a nearby table noticed it and straightened instinctively, offering a subtle nod of recognition that Marissa returned with quiet dignity. She paused briefly to observe a family seated near the window, a mother in desert fatigues sharing lunch with 2 small children. The sight warmed her heart, reminding her of countless similar scenes she'd witnessed during her years as regional director of military contract compliance. The cafe was busy but well organized, with servers weaving efficiently between tables. Marissa's trained eye noted the width of the aisles, the height of the tables, and the spacing of the furniture. She mentally checked these measurements against the accessibility standards she knew by heart. A group of elderly veterans sat in one corner, their Vietnam-era caps marking them as brothers in arms. They were sharing coffee and stories, their laughter carrying across the room. One of them caught her eye and raised his coffee cup in silent salute. As Marissa approached the counter, she noticed the slight hesitation in the young cashier's smile, a familiar reaction she'd learned to take in stride. Behind the counter, staff members moved with practiced efficiency, preparing orders and calling out numbers. The aroma of fresh coffee and baked goods filled the air. "Welcome to Goldwater Café," the cashier said, her voice pleasant but uncertain as she glanced down at Marissa's wheelchair. Marissa smiled warmly, her voice carrying the quiet authority that had commanded respect throughout her military career. "Good afternoon. I'd like a coffee, black, and your chicken salad sandwich, please." As she waited for her order, Marissa continued her careful observation of the establishment. Her eyes tracked the movement of servers, noted the placement of napkin dispensers and condiment stations, and assessed the overall flow of customer traffic. Years of conducting compliance reviews had made such assessments second nature. A young family with a stroller struggled slightly with the cafe's entrance door, and Marissa made a mental note. Her fingers unconsciously touched the small notebook in her blazer pocket, a habit from countless facility inspections over the years. The cafe's owner, Preston Goldwater, emerged from the back office, his expensive suit slightly too tight across his soft middle. He moved through the space with the air of someone who considered himself above the daily bustle, barely acknowledging his hardworking staff. Marissa watched as he passed by the veterans' table without the slightest recognition of their service caps or the stories they shared. His eyes swept over the military family by the window with similar indifference. These small moments of oversight didn't escape Marissa's attention. They never did. When her order number was called, Marissa moved forward to collect it, navigating the space with the same precision that had earned her command of a platoon. The counter was just slightly too high, another detail that registered in her professional assessment. She selected a table that offered both comfort and a clear view of the cafe's operations. Setting her coffee and sandwich before her, Marissa maintained her perfect posture, a habit ingrained through decades of service. The purple heart pin on her blazer caught the light again, a quiet reminder of the sacrifice that had placed her in the wheelchair. Several customers moved respectfully to make way as she positioned. Preston Goldwater's eyes narrowed as he spotted Marissa at her table. He straightened his ill-fitting suit jacket and marched toward her with heavy steps, his face twisted in a look of disdain. Several customers glanced up from their meals, sensing the tension in his approach. "Excuse me," Preston said loudly, making sure his voice carried across the cafe. "I'm going to have to ask you to leave. We don't serve charity cases here at Goldwater Cafe." The buzz of conversation died instantly. Silverware clattered as shocked diners set down their utensils. Marissa looked up from her untouched sandwich, her steely blue eyes meeting Preston's contemptuous stare with unwavering dignity. "Sir," she said calmly, "I'm a paying customer. I've already purchased my meal." "I don't care what you've purchased," Preston sneered, pointing at her wheelchair. "We have standards here. This isn't a soup kitchen, and we don't serve beggars." The young Marine who had nodded to Marissa earlier half rose from his seat, his face flushed with anger. But Marissa caught his eye and gave a subtle shake of her head. She wouldn't have anyone fight her battles. Tiffany, the assistant manager, hurried over with her phone already in hand. Her bleached blonde hair bounced as she positioned herself next to Preston, her heavily made-up face bright with cruel excitement. "This is going to be perfect for our social media," Tiffany chirped, raising her phone to capture the scene. "Our followers will love seeing how we keep the riffraff out. It'll be so good for our image." The Vietnam veterans in the corner stood up in unified protest, their coffee cups forgotten. The mother in desert fatigues covered her children's ears, her face a mask of disbelief and disgust. Marissa's hand unconsciously touched her purple heart pin, the medal she'd earned saving her entire platoon in Afghanistan. The action drew Preston's attention to the decoration, but his face showed only contempt. "Oh, please," he scoffed, waving dismissively at the pin. "Anyone can buy those things at Army surplus stores. You probably got that wheelchair at the same place." Several gasps echoed through the cafe. Tiffany giggled as she continued filming, her phone tracking every moment of the humiliation. "This is going viral for sure," she said, tapping away at her screen. #quality control, #standards matter. The military family by the window gathered their things and stood up, the mother's face tight with controlled anger. Other customers began pushing away their plates, their meals forgotten in the face of such blatant discrimination. Through it all, Marissa maintained her military Marissering, her posture straight and dignified despite the public humiliation. She folded her hands carefully in her lap, her voice steady and clear as she addressed Preston. "Mr. Goldwater, I suggest you reconsider your position," she said quietly. "My position?" Preston's voice rose higher, his face reddening. "My position is that this is my establishment, and I decide who gets served here. I won't have your kind bringing down the tone of my cafe." "The tone, sir?" Marissa's question was calm, but her eyes were sharp as she gestured to the now empty tables around her. "It seems to me the tone has already been affected, but not by my presence." Tiffany bounced on her toes, still filming. "Oh my gosh, she's talking back!" "This is amazing content." Preston's face twisted with rage. He grabbed Marissa's untouched plate, snatching it away from her. Coffee sloshed over the rim of her cup, staining the pristine tablecloth. "Get out," he shouted, spittle flying from his lips. "Get out of my cafe before I call the police. I don't care about your fake medals or your sob story. We don't serve wheelchair cases here." The remaining customers watched in horrified silence as Marissa calmly unlocked her wheelchair's brakes. She backed away from the table with precise movements, her military training evident in every controlled motion. "Very well, Mr. Goldwater," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the silent cafe. "I'll leave your establishment now, but I want you to know that I've heard every word you've said, and I've witnessed every action you've taken." Preston sneered. What's that supposed to mean? It means exactly what I said, sir. Marissa's steel blue eyes met his without flinching. I've heard and seen everything. As she turned her wheelchair toward the exit, the Vietnam veterans formed an impromptu honor guard, standing at attention as she passed. The young Marine opened the door for her, his jaw clenched tight with suppressed anger. "This is so going to trend!" Tiffany exclaimed, still filming as Marissa left the cafe. "Our followers will totally love how we handled this situation." Preston stood triumphantly in the center of his now silent cafe, straightening his suit jacket with shaking hands. He looked around at the disgusted faces of his remaining customers, his expression daring anyone to challenge him. But no one spoke. They didn't have to. The empty tables and abandoned meals spoke volumes about the impact of his actions. The mother in desert fatigues guided her children toward the door, shielding them from Preston's glare. The Vietnam veterans followed, their coffee cups left untouched on their table. Through the window, Marissa could be seen making her way down the sidewalk, her posture as straight and dignified as ever. The Purple Heart pin on her blazer caught the sunlight one last time before she disappeared from view, leaving behind a cafe forever changed by the owner's cruel prejudice and his assistant's eager participation in public humiliation. Marissa quietly reached into her blazer pocket and retrieved her phone. With practiced efficiency, she began documenting Preston's tirade, her fingers moving swiftly across the screen as she took notes. Years of military service had taught her the importance of detailed documentation. Preston paced in front of her table, his face growing redder with each passing minute. "I told you to leave. What are you doing with that phone?" "I'm simply making some observations, Mr. Goldwater," Marissa replied calmly, her eyes scanning the cafe with trained precision. Behind the counter, a health inspection certificate caught her attention, its expiration date clearly visible from her position. She zoomed in with her phone's camera, capturing the date that had passed 3 months ago. A young serviceman in uniform approached the counter to pay his bill. Marissa watched as Tiffany rang up his order, noting how the prices on his receipt differed from the menu board. The special military family meal deal showed a 20% markup compared to the regular menu items. "You're charging our service members more than civilian customers," Marissa stated quietly, making another note on her phone. Preston spun around, his poorly fitted suit jacket straining at the shoulders. "That's none of your business. You're trespassing now." 2 tables over, an elderly veteran in a Vietnam War cap stood up. "Sir, this is no way to treat a fellow veteran. That Purple Heart she's wearing means something." "Sit down and mind your own business," Preston snapped, dismissing the man with a wave of his hand. "Or you can leave too." Marissa continued her systematic observation, noting how another military family was directed to the premium seating area with inflated menu prices, while civilian customers were offered the regular menu with lower rates. Her fingers moved steadily across her phone screen, recording each instance of discrimination. A young mother in an army uniform approached Marissa's table. "Ma'am, this isn't right. Would you like me to call someone?" "Thank you, soldier," Marissa replied with a gentle smile, "but I have everything under control." Preston's face contorted with rage as he noticed more customers speaking up. "Security!" he bellowed, though the cafe had no security staff. "Someone remove this woman!" Marissa's careful eyes caught sight of moldy bread being served to a table of Marines, while fresh loaves were clearly visible for the civilian customers. She documented this with a quick photo, her military training evident in her methodical approach. "Your health code violations are quite concerning, Mr. Goldwater," she noted professionally, "as are your discriminatory pricing practices targeting military personnel." Tiffany hurried over, still filming with her phone. "You can't take pictures in here. It's against our policy." "Interesting," Marissa replied, taking a photo of the walls. "I don't see that policy posted anywhere, though it is required by law if you wish to enforce it." More customers began to notice the situation unfolding. A group of off-duty police officers at a corner table watched intently, their expressions growing concerned as Preston's behavior became more erratic. "Get out! Get out!" Preston shouted, his face now purple with rage. He slammed his hands on Marissa's table, making the silverware jump. "I'll have you arrested." Marissa remained perfectly composed, her military Marissa ring unchanged. "Mr. Goldwater, I've documented 17 separate violations of health codes, pricing regulations, and discrimination laws in the past 15 minutes. Would you like me to continue?" Preston's eyes widened as he finally noticed the official-looking notebook she had placed beside her phone. His gaze darted to the expired permits, the discriminatory pricing signs, and the moldy bread being served to military customers. You can't," he stammered, his confidence wavering for the first time. "Actually, I can," Marissa replied calmly, continuing to type notes into her phone. "And I am—" More customers began pulling out their own phones, recording Preston's increasingly aggressive behavior. The young mother in uniform was quietly warning other military families about the pricing discrepancy she had discovered. "This is harassment," Preston shouted, but his voice had lost its authority. "Tiffany, call the police." "I wouldn't advise that," one of the off-duty officers called from his table. "Not unless you want to explain these violations to the responding officers." Marissa methodically continued her documentation, noting the time and date of each observation. Her trained eye caught additional details: the kitchen staff using expired ingredients for military orders, the systematic overcharging of service members, and the pattern of discriminatory service. "I've seen enough," Marissa announced quietly, tucking her phone away. She pulled out a business card and placed it on the table. "You'll be hearing from my office, Mr. Goldwater. Every violation has been recorded and will be thoroughly investigated." Preston snatched up the card, his hands shaking as he read her title: Regional Director of Military Contract Compliance. His face drained of color as the implications sank in. "This is all a misunderstanding," he backpedaled, his previous bravado evaporating. "I can explain everything." "I'm sure you'll have that opportunity," Marissa replied, unlocking her wheelchair's brakes, "in front of the proper authorities." The cafe had grown silent, every customer watching as Marissa prepared to leave. The evidence she had gathered painted a clear picture of systematic discrimination and health code violations, all carefully documented with military precision. Preston stood frozen, the business card crumpled in his trembling hand as Marissa guided her wheelchair toward the door. His carefully constructed facade of superiority had crumbled in the face of her quiet, methodical investigation. The young mother in uniform held the door open, offering Marissa a respectful nod. "Thank you, ma'am," she whispered as Marissa passed. "Just doing my duty, soldier," Marissa replied softly, her dignity intact despite the discrimination she had endured. "Just doing my duty." Preston's face twisted with fury as he stormed across the cafe floor, deliberately positioning himself to block Marissa's wheelchair from reaching the exit. His expensive leather shoes squeaked against the polished tiles as he planted his feet wide, creating a human barrier. "You're not going anywhere until you delete those photos," he snarled, looming over her wheelchair. His hands gripped the armrests, preventing her from moving forward or backward. "I'm calling security right now if you don't comply." Marissa's military training kicked in automatically. She assessed the situation with practiced precision, noting the closest exits, potential allies, and immediate threats. Preston's aggressive posture and tight grip on her wheelchair indicated escalating hostility. His breathing was rapid, his face flushed, classic signs of someone losing control. Several customers gasped at Preston's actions. A Marine sergeant at a nearby table slowly stood up, his expression dark. Two elderly veterans exchanged worried glances, their hands gripping their coffee cups tightly. A young military family quickly gathered their children, moving them away from the unfolding confrontation. "Mr. Goldwater," Marissa said calmly, her voice steady despite the physical intimidation, "you are currently assaulting a disabled veteran. I strongly suggest you step away from my wheelchair." "This is my establishment," Preston shouted, his spittle landing on Marissa's sleeve. "I decide who stays and who goes." His fingers dug deeper into the wheelchair's armrests, making the metal creak. Marissa could have responded with force. Her combat training had taught her several ways to neutralize an aggressor, even from a seated position. But her years of command experience had also taught her the value of de-escalation. Violence, even in self-defense, would only feed into Preston's narrative. "Sir," called out one of the military wives, "what you're doing is assault. Please step away from her wheelchair." Preston's head snapped towards the voice. "Mind your own business. This woman is trespassing and harassing my staff." Marissa used his moment of distraction to smoothly retrieve her phone from her blazer pocket. Her fingers moved with practiced efficiency across the screen, muscle memory from countless tactical communications during her service. "Who are you calling?" Preston demanded, his attention snapping back to her. "Your family can't help you here. I have every right to protect my business from troublemakers." "Actually," Marissa replied softly, raising the phone to her ear, "I'm calling someone else entirely." The cafe had grown eerily quiet. Even Tiffany had stopped her incessant filming, her phone hanging limply at her side as she watched her boss's increasingly erratic behavior. The only sounds were the gentle hum of the coffee machines and Preston's heavy breathing. "Yes, this is Colonel Hartwell," Marissa spoke into the phone, her voice clear and professional. "I'm at the Goldwater Café. We have a situation that requires immediate attention." She paused, listening. "Yes, physical restraint and assault. Multiple witnesses present." Preston's face flickered with the first hint of uncertainty. His grip on the wheelchair loosened slightly, but he maintained his blocking position. "You're bluffing," he said, but his voice had lost some of its conviction. "This is just a trick." "Understood," Marissa continued her call, ignoring Preston's interruption. "Yes, full documentation has been secured. The owner is currently preventing me from leaving by physically restraining my wheelchair." Another pause. "Copy that. Standing by." The Marine sergeant had moved closer, positioning himself within easy reach if the situation deteriorated further. Other customers had their phones out, recording Preston's actions. The young mother in uniform had her own phone ready, clearly prepared to call for help if needed. "Mr. Goldwater," Marissa said as she ended her call, tucking the phone back into her pocket, "I'm going to give you one final opportunity to step away from my wheelchair and allow me to leave peacefully." Preston's face contorted with conflicting emotions, anger warring with growing apprehension. "You can't threaten me," he blustered, but his voice had risen in pitch. "I'm a respected business owner. I have connections." "So do I," Marissa replied simply. The cafe door chimed as two uniformed police officers entered, followed by a man in a crisp suit wearing a federal investigator's badge. Preston's hands finally released the wheelchair as he spun to face the newcomers. I was just..." he stammered, his previous arrogance crumbling. "She was causing trouble." "Step away from the wheelchair, sir," one of the officers commanded firmly. "Now!" Preston stumbled backward, his expensive shoes scuffing against the floor. His face had lost all color as he watched the federal investigator approach Marissa with a respectful nod. "Colonel Hartwell," the investigator greeted her. "I see you've already gathered quite a bit of evidence for us." "Indeed," Marissa replied, her posture remaining perfectly straight in her wheelchair. "Mr. Goldwater has been most informative." The young mother who had supported Marissa earlier stepped forward. "Officers, I have video of him blocking her wheelchair and threatening her. Several of us witnessed the whole thing." Other customers nodded in agreement, their phones still recording. The Marine sergeant stood at parade rest, his presence a silent reminder of the military community Preston had chosen to disrespect. "This is ridiculous," Preston protested weakly. "I was just protecting my business." "By assaulting a decorated veteran?" the investigator asked coldly. That's an interesting protection strategy, Mr. Goldwater, one that will certainly feature prominently in our investigation. Marissa remained composed as statements were taken from witnesses. Her military Marissering never wavered as she provided her own detailed account of the events. Preston's physical intimidation had failed to shake her dignity or determination. Instead, it had only strengthened the case against him, adding assault to his growing list of violations. Marissa maneuvered her wheelchair through the cafe's door with practiced grace, refusing to show any sign of the humiliation she had endured. The morning sun caught her Purple Heart pin as she emerged, making it glint like a small Marissacon of dignity. Several customers followed her out, their faces etched with concern and disgust at what they had witnessed. Inside, Preston strutted behind the counter, his chest puffed out like a peacock. "And that's how you handle troublemakers," he announced to Tiffany, straightening his expensive but ill-fitting suit jacket. "You have to show them who's boss." Tiffany nodded eagerly, her bleached blonde hair bouncing as she clutched her phone. "You totally showed her, Mr. Goldwater. I got some amazing footage for our social media. Should I post it now?" "Of course," Preston declared, running his fingers through his thinning hair. "Let everyone see how we maintain our standards. We can't let these people think they can just roll in here and disturb our legitimate customers." At a nearby table, an elderly couple exchanged troubled glances before quietly gathering their belongings. The wife's hands shook slightly as she collected her purse, her half-finished coffee left behind. Her husband, wearing a Korean War veteran's cap, helped her up, deliberately avoiding eye contact with Preston. "Leaving so soon?" Preston called out, his voice dripping with false concern. "We haven't even served dessert yet." "I've lost my appetite," the elderly veteran muttered, guiding his wife toward the exit. Outside in the parking lot, Marissa transferred smoothly from her wheelchair into her specially modified vehicle. The interior was a testament to military efficiency, everything within easy reach, every control adapted for her needs. She settled into the driver's seat and pulled out her phone, along with a small leather-bound notebook. Her fingers moved swiftly across the phone's screen as she made a series of calls. "Yes, sir," she spoke into the device, her voice clear and professional. "The situation is exactly as we suspected. Full documentation has been secured." She paused, listening. Correct. Multiple witnesses, plus social media evidence they're helpfully creating themselves. As Marissa continued her methodical work, military vehicles began appearing in the surrounding streets. A camouflaged Humvee rolled quietly past the cafe. Two military police cruisers parked discreetly at opposite ends of the block. None of them activated their lights or drew attention, but their presence was unmistakable to anyone paying attention. Inside the cafe, Preston remained oblivious to the gathering storm. He was too busy regaling Tiffany with tales of his imagined victory. "Did you see how quickly she backed down?" he boasted, leaning against the counter. "These people need to learn their place. We have a reputation to maintain." More customers continued to leave. A young family in military uniforms gathered their children, the mother shaking her head in disappointment. A group of office workers abandoned their lunch orders, leaving cash on their tables to cover their bills before walking out. "Mr. Goldwater," one of the remaining servers called out nervously, "we're losing customers." Preston waved dismissively. "Good riddance." "They're probably all friends with that troublemaker. We'll get better customers, the kind who appreciate our exclusive atmosphere." The cafe grew eerily quiet as more people departed. The usual lunch rush chatter died away, replaced by the hollow sound of chairs scraping against the floor as patrons left. The coffee machines hummed in the background, creating an almost ominous undertone to the emptying establishment. Tiffany's enthusiasm began to waver as she noticed the exodus. "Maybe we should offer some kind of special?" she suggested, fidgeting with her phone. "To bring people back?" "Nonsense," Preston declared, though his voice carried a slight edge of uncertainty. "This is just temporary. They'll all come crawling back when they realize we're the only premium cafe in the area." Outside, Marissa continued her work with military precision, her notebook pages filled with detailed observations, times, names, and incident descriptions. She documented everything from Preston's initial discrimination to his physical intimidation, noting each witness and their contact information. Through her windshield, she observed more military vehicles taking up strategic positions around the area. A black SUV with government plates pulled up quietly behind her vehicle. Men in suits emerged, carrying briefcases and tablets, their movements purposeful and coordinated. The cafe's large windows offered a clear view of the increasingly empty interior. Preston paced behind the counter, his earlier bravado beginning to crack as he noticed the unusual quiet. He kept glancing at his phone, checking the time, then the door, then back to his phone. "Where is everyone?" he muttered, tugging at his collar. "The lunch rush isn't over yet." Tiffany stood by the register, repeatedly refreshing her social media feeds. Her heavily made-up face showed growing concern as comments began appearing on her posts. Not the supportive responses she had expected, but expressions of outrage and calls for boycotts. "Mr. Goldwater," she called out, her voice uncertain, "I think we might have a problem with the social media response." But Preston wasn't listening. He had finally noticed the military vehicles through the cafe's windows. His face paled slightly as he watched a uniformed officer step out of one of the vehicles, speaking into a radio. "It's nothing," he assured himself aloud, though his voice had lost its earlier confidence. "Just a coincidence. They're probably here for lunch." He straightened his tie, unaware that his hands were shaking slightly. The cafe stood nearly empty now, the usual lunch crowd reduced to a handful of uncomfortable-looking patrons who were hurriedly finishing their meals. The silence grew heavier with each passing minute, broken only by the occasional clink of cutlery and the steady hum of coffee machines. In her vehicle, Marissa completed her final notes and made one last call. "All documentation is prepared," she reported calmly. "Witnesses are ready to provide statements. You may proceed whenever ready." She ended the call and sat back, her military posture perfect even in the driver's seat. The morning's confrontation had been difficult, but Marissa had endured far worse in her military career. She knew that sometimes the most effective response to discrimination wasn't immediate confrontation, but rather a carefully orchestrated operation that would bring lasting change. As she watched more official vehicles arrive, she allowed herself a small smile, knowing that justice was about to be served. At precisely 10 minutes past noon, 3 military police vehicles pulled up to the front of Goldwater Café, their lights silent, but their presence commanding. Federal marshals emerged from unmarked black SUVs, their badges gleaming in the midday sun. The coordinated arrival brought all activity inside the cafe to a complete halt. Preston stood frozen behind the counter, his face draining of color as he watched uniformed officers approach his front door. "This can't be happening," he whispered, tugging nervously at his collar. The expensive fabric of his suit suddenly felt suffocating. The lead marshal, a tall woman with stern features, entered first, followed by 4 military police officers. Their boots clicked against the tile floor in perfect unison. Behind them came 2 men in crisp suits carrying briefcases full of legal documents. "Preston Goldwater?" the marshal called out, her voice carrying across the nearly empty cafe. Preston raised his hand weakly, trying to maintain his earlier bravado. "That's me. What seems to be the problem?" "I'm Federal Marshal Sarah Chen. We're here to execute an immediate termination of your military service contract and seize this facility pending investigation." She approached the counter, laying out official documents. "This location is now under federal jurisdiction." Tiffany, who had been obsessively checking her phone, let out a small squeak of distress. "Mr. Goldwater?" Her voice quavered as she watched military police begin securing the exits. Preston's hands shook as he stared at the papers. "There must be some mistake. I have a valid contract. You can't just—" "We can and we are," Marshal Chen interrupted firmly. "Your contract includes specific non-discrimination clauses and veteran service requirements. We have documented evidence of multiple violations, including this morning's incident. The color drained further from Preston's face as realization dawned. The woman in the wheelchair, he breathed. Colonel Marissa Hartwell, one of the military officers corrected sharply. Regional Director of Military Contract Compliance. Tiffany's phone slipped from her trembling fingers, clattering onto the counter. Oh no, she whimpered. My social media posts. Yes, miss, Marshal Chen turned to her. Your social media documentation of discriminatory practices will be included in the evidence. I suggest you contact legal representation. Military police officers moved efficiently through the café, speaking quietly but firmly to the few remaining customers. This establishment is now closed pending federal investigation. Please collect your belongings and exit the premises. Preston watched helplessly as his customers were escorted out. His hands clutched the edge of the counter, knuckles white with tension. You don't understand, he pleaded. This cafe is all I have. My father built this business. Which makes your mismanagement of the military contract even more egregious, Marshal Chen cut in. Our investigation has uncovered systematic overcharging of military families, expired health permits, and numerous discrimination complaints. 2 officers began placing evidence markers near the expired permits Preston had tried to hide behind potted plants. Another team photographed the discriminatory pricing signs he'd posted for military meal packages. But I have rights! Preston's voice rose with panic. You need warrants! You need… A marshal stepped forward, presenting another document. This is our federal warrant, Mr. Goldwater, and your contract explicitly grants us authority to seize the premises upon evidence of serious violations. Tiffany burst into tears, mascara running down her cheeks. I only posted those things because Mr. Goldwater said it was okay. I didn't know it was illegal. Miss, an officer addressed her firmly, please step away from the register. We'll need to document all social media posts related to discrimination at this establishment. Preston watched in horror as officers began disconnecting his registers and securing his office. The carefully crafted world he'd built was crumbling around him. His hands trembled as he reached for his phone. I need to call my lawyer, he stammered. That would be advisable, Marshal Chen agreed coldly, though I suggest you find one specializing in federal contract law and civil rights violations. Military police efficiently secured the kitchen area, documenting health code violations that Preston had ignored for months. The sound of cameras clicking and officers calling out violation numbers filled the air where customer chatter had been just hours before. This is all a misunderstanding, Preston tried again, his voice growing desperate. I can explain everything. That woman, Colonel Hartwell, she didn't identify herself. How was I supposed to know? The Purple Heart on her uniform should have been your first clue, an officer responded sharply. But this goes far beyond this morning's incident, Mr. Goldwater. We've been building this case for months. Tiffany slumped against the wall, scrolling frantically through her phone. They're all sharing my posts, she said, horror in her voice. Everyone's calling us monsters. My mom's going to see this. Preston barely heard her, his attention fixed on the officers now changing the locks on his doors. Signs were being posted. Closed by federal order, pending investigation. Please collect your personal belongings, Marshal Chen instructed them both. You have 15 minutes. Everything else remains for the investigation. The reality of the situation finally seemed to hit Preston. His legs gave out, and he had to grab the counter to stay upright. The cafe, his inheritance, his pride, his social status, was being stripped away in a matter of minutes. Outside, a small crowd had gathered to watch the proceedings. Among them, Preston spotted several of the military families he'd overcharged, their expressions a mixture of satisfaction and disappointment. The elderly veteran who had walked out earlier stood with them, his Korean war cap held respectfully over his heart. And there, in her vehicle across the street, sat Colonel Hartwell, her military Marissa perfect as she observed justice being served. The morning sun still caught her Purple Heart, but now it seemed to Preston less like a decoration and more like a badge of authority, one he had foolishly dismissed. The marshals continued their work with practiced efficiency, transforming his cafe into a sealed crime scene in mere minutes. Preston's world, built on inherited privilege and prejudice, was being dismantled with the same military precision he had mocked just hours before. "Mr. Goldwater," Marshal Chen said, holding up a thick folder, "let me introduce you properly to the woman you refused service to this morning." She pulled out an official military document with a photograph of Colonel Marissa Hartwell in full dress uniform. "This is Colonel Marissa Hartwell, Regional Director of Military Contract Compliance for Tennessee, Kentucky, and Georgia. She oversees military contracts worth more than $230 million annually." Preston's legs gave out completely. He collapsed into a nearby chair, his expensive suit wrinkled and damp with nervous sweat. That's impossible," he stammered. "I assure you it's quite possible," a familiar voice rang out. Colonel Hartwell wheeled herself through the front door, her posture perfect, her Purple Heart gleaming. The morning's vulnerability was gone, replaced by unmistakable authority. "And you, Mr. Goldwater, have given me quite a morning's work." Tiffany dropped her phone again, this time not bothering to pick it up. "Oh God," she whispered, "I posted those horrible things about a colonel?" "Your cafe," Colonel Hartwell continued, positioning her wheelchair at the center of the room, "operates under a $2.3 million annual federal contract specifically designed to serve military personnel and their families. This property sits on land leased from Fort Campbell. Did you even read the contract before you signed it?" Preston's mouth opened and closed several times before he could form words. "My lawyer handled all that. I thought it was a simple food service agreement." "Simple?" Colonel Hartwell's steel blue eyes fixed on him. "This contract required you to provide discounted meals to active service members, veterans, and their families. Instead, you've been charging them premium prices and pocketing the difference." An investigator approached with a stack of receipts. "We've documented systematic overcharging dating back 18 months. Military families were charged an average of 30% more than civilian customers for identical meals." I can explain." Preston's voice cracked. "Please do," Colonel Hartwell said quietly. "Explain why you violated the Americans with Disabilities Act by refusing service to disabled veterans. Explain why you failed to maintain proper health and safety standards required by your contract. Explain why you thought it appropriate to physically intimidate a wheelchair user in your establishment." Preston's face had gone from pale to ashen. "I didn't know who you were. If you had just identified yourself." "That's precisely the point, Mr. Goldwater," Colonel Hartwell interrupted. "You shouldn't need to know someone's rank or position to treat them with basic human dignity. That Purple Heart pin you so casually dismissed? It means I lost both legs saving my entire platoon in Afghanistan. But you didn't see a decorated veteran, did you? You saw what you wanted to see. Someone you thought you could bully with impunity." Tiffany began sobbing openly now. "He told me it was okay to post those things. He said we needed to keep certain people out to maintain our image." "Miss," Marshal Chen addressed her, "your social media posts documenting discriminatory practices will be included in the federal investigation. I suggest you retain legal counsel immediately." Colonel Hartwell wheeled closer to Preston, who seemed to shrink in his chair. "Your contract explicitly required you to provide accessible seating, veteran discounts, and priority service to military families. Instead, you've been treating this cafe as your personal profit center while discriminating against the very people you were contracted to serve." An investigator approached with more documentation. "Sir, we've found evidence of systematic fraud. The veteran discount program funds were diverted to a personal account. Health inspection reports were falsified. Multiple complaints about discrimination were buried." "It was just business," Preston pleaded weakly. "We needed to maintain certain standards." "Standards?" Colonel Hartwell's voice could have frozen fire. "Let me tell you about standards, Mr. Goldwater. Every person wearing a uniform, every veteran who served, every military family member who sacrifices daily, they are the standard. Your contract obligated you to serve them. Instead, you chose to abuse their trust for profit. Preston looked desperately around the room, seeking any sympathetic face. He found none. The military police continued their methodical documentation, while federal marshals secured files and computers. Your contract is hereby terminated, Colonel Hartwell stated firmly. This facility will be seized pending full investigation. Given the evidence we've already gathered, you'll likely face federal charges for contract fraud, discrimination, and misappropriation of funds designated for veteran services. But this is my whole life, Preston whispered. My father built this business. And you destroyed it in a single morning, Colonel Hartwell replied. Though truthfully, you've been destroying it slowly for years through your prejudice and greed. The only difference is that today, you chose the wrong person to discriminate against. The reality of his situation finally seemed to break through Preston's denial. His shoulders slumped, and tears began rolling down his cheeks. Please, he begged, there must be something I can do. Some way to make this right. That opportunity passed the moment you decided to humiliate a disabled veteran in front of your customers, Colonel Hartwell said. The evidence of your systematic violations is overwhelming. Your fate now rests with federal prosecutors. Marshal Chen stepped forward with final paperwork. Mr. Goldwater, you have 10 minutes to collect personal belongings. After that, this facility is under federal control. Preston sat in his chair, utterly broken, watching as his carefully constructed world crumbled around him. The power dynamic had shifted completely. The man who had tried to humiliate a homeless woman now sat helpless before the full authority of military justice. Colonel Hartwell turned her wheelchair towards the door, then paused. Mr. Goldwater, the next time you see someone in a wheelchair, remember this day. Remember that dignity isn't something you grant or withhold based on appearance. It's something every human being deserves, regardless of their circumstances. The evening news led with dramatic helicopter footage of federal agents surrounding Goldwater Café. Breaking tonight, the anchor announced, a routine cafe visit uncovered systematic discrimination against veterans, leading to a federal investigation and immediate contract termination. The story spread like wildfire across social media platforms. Body camera footage from Colonel Marissa Hartwell's wheelchair showed the entire confrontation in crystal clarity. Preston Goldwater's sneering face as he called her a beggar, his aggressive posturing as he blocked her path, and the quiet dignity with which she documented everything. But it was Colonel Hartwell's background that captured the nation's attention. News outlets quickly uncovered the full story of her military service, broadcasting archival footage from Afghanistan. The grainy video showed a younger Marissa Hartwell, then a commanding officer, directing her platoon through heavy enemy fire. Colonel Hartwell's actions that day saved 37 American lives, her former platoon sergeant explained to reporters. She noticed the ambush before anyone else did. Even after the first explosion took her legs, she continued commanding the response, refusing evacuation until every single soldier was safe. The congressional record detailed her decoration ceremony, where she received both the Purple Heart and special congressional recognition. Colonel Hartwell's unwavering courage under fire exemplifies the highest traditions of military service, the citation read. Investigation records revealed that Goldwater Café wasn't an isolated incident. Colonel Hartwell had been conducting a systematic review of military contractor compliance across 3 states, documenting patterns of discrimination against veterans and their families. We'd received multiple complaints about several establishments, explained Major Sarah Chen from the Military Contract Compliance Office. Colonel Hartwell personally volunteered to investigate, knowing her presence might trigger discriminatory responses that would expose violations. Local veterans began coming forward with their own stories about Goldwater Café. A former Marine described being overcharged on meals advertised as having military discounts. A soldier's widow shared how Preston had seated her family in the back, away from regular customers. The funds Mr. Goldwater diverted from the veteran discount program total more than $100,000, Federal Marshal Thompson announced at a press conference. This wasn't just discrimination, it was systematic fraud targeting those who served our country. Security cameras from neighboring businesses captured Preston's meltdown as he was escorted from the premises. The man who had strutted so confidently that morning now shuffled between federal agents, his designer suit wrinkled and stained with stress-induced sweat. Local veterans organizations organized a rally outside the closed cafe, holding signs supporting Colonel Hartwell and demanding justice for veterans. "What happened here is a betrayal of trust," spoke VFW Post Commander James Martinez. "This establishment operated on federal land specifically to serve military families. Instead, they faced discrimination and exploitation." The most damning evidence came from Preston's own assistant manager. Tiffany's social media posts documented years of discriminatory practices, complete with mocking captions about keeping out the riffraff. Her attempt to delete the posts failed. Federal investigators had already archived everything. By evening, national veteran advocacy groups had joined the story. Colonel Hartwell's actions expose a broader problem of discrimination against disabled veterans, said Veterans Rights Association spokesperson Maria Thompson. Her courage in confronting this issue head-on will help protect veterans across the country. Military families who witnessed the incident provided devastating testimony. "The way he treated her was disgusting," said Sarah Miller, wife of an active duty sergeant. "When she showed her Purple Heart pin, he actually laughed. Who laughs at a Purple Heart?" The investigation expanded beyond just Preston's Café. Colonel Hartwell's documentation revealed connections to other businesses operating under military contracts, suggesting a wider network of fraud and discrimination. Colonel Hartwell's investigation has opened a much larger case, confirmed federal prosecutor David Chen. "We're looking at multiple establishments that may have systematically violated their contractual obligations to military personnel and their families." As night fell, the cafe stood empty and dark, federal seals visible on its doors. The establishment that had once profited from military contracts while disrespecting veterans would never serve another customer. Preston Goldwater's empire, built on discrimination and fraud, had crumbled in a single day, brought down by the very woman he had mistaken for a powerless target. Through it all, Colonel Hartwell maintained her characteristic composure, focused on the broader mission rather than personal vindication. "This isn't about one cafe or one incident," she told reporters. "It's about ensuring every veteran receives the respect and dignity they've earned through their service. That mission continues." Preston Goldwater stood in his empty office, watching federal agents methodically box up his business records. The morning's events had triggered a cascade of consequences that were now crushing his carefully constructed world. "Your franchise license is hereby revoked, effective immediately," the franchise compliance officer stated, handing him a thick stack of documents. "Based on documented violations of federal contractor requirements and discriminatory practices, you are permanently barred from operating any military-affiliated establishments." His phone buzzed constantly with notifications. The viral video of his confrontation with Colonel Hartwell had spread across every social platform, drawing thousands of outraged comments. Local news stations were running continuous coverage of the unfolding scandal. In the adjacent office, Tiffany faced her own reckoning. Her social media posts mocking disabled veterans had been screen captured and shared widely, drawing fierce condemnation. The franchise headquarters terminated her employment within hours. "Your posts constitute evidence of systematic discrimination," the human resources representative informed her via video call. "The company is also exploring legal action for damage to our brand reputation." Federal investigators worked through filing cabinets and computer records, uncovering layer after layer of financial misconduct. Preston had been skimming from the mandatory military discount program for years, pocketing funds meant to support service members and their families. "We've identified over $200,000 in fraudulent charges," the lead investigator announced. Military families were consistently overcharged on items advertised as having service member discounts. Those families were now coming forward en masse. The military police had set up a dedicated hotline for complaints about Goldwater Café, and it was ringing non-stop. He charged us full price but recorded it as a military discount, one Army spouse reported. We've been eating there weekly for 3 years. Preston's attorney delivered more bad news that afternoon. The federal charges are severe, she explained. Contract fraud, discrimination against protected veterans, misappropriation of federal funds. Each charge carries significant penalties. Your legal fees alone will be astronomical. His business accounts were frozen pending investigation. Credit card processors suspended service. Suppliers canceled contracts. The financial bleeding was immediate and severe. Your personal assets may be subject to seizure, his accountant warned. The federal investigation has flagged suspicious transfers between business and personal accounts. Tiffany's situation deteriorated just as rapidly. Job applications were rejected as soon as employers searched her name online. Her social media influencer aspirations evaporated as followers fled and sponsors dropped her. Your posts violated multiple company policies, stated the termination letter. Your actions have exposed the company to potential liability and damaged our relationship with military customers. By evening, investigators had traced Preston's fraudulent practices to his other business ventures. What began as an investigation of one cafe was expanding into a full audit of his entire operation. We've identified similar patterns at your other locations, the federal prosecutor informed him. This appears to be systematic fraud rather than isolated incidents. Preston's remaining staff resigned en masse, unwilling to be associated with the scandal. Suppliers demanded immediate payment of outstanding invoices, fearing his accounts would soon be frozen. His entire business infrastructure was collapsing. The total financial impact could exceed $1 million, his financial advisor estimated. Between legal fees, penalties, and restitution to defrauded customers, you're facing potential bankruptcy. Military families continued flooding the complaint hotline with evidence of overcharging. Each call added to the mounting legal pressure. My husband deployed 3 times, and this guy was stealing from us the whole time, one military spouse told investigators. We trusted his business because of the military contract. He betrayed that trust. The speed of justice was breathtaking. In less than 24 hours, Preston had gone from successful business owner to potential federal defendant. His discrimination against Colonel Hartwell had triggered a chain reaction that exposed years of fraudulent practices. Federal contracts involving military personnel are subject to immediate enforcement, explained the compliance officer. When veterans' rights are violated, we don't wait to act. As federal agents finished boxing up his records, Preston sat alone in his office, surrounded by the ruins of his business empire. The man who had mockingly dismissed a decorated veteran that morning now faced the full weight of federal prosecution, his arrogance replaced by the stark reality of consequences. 3 days after the initial confrontation, Preston Goldwater's life had completely unraveled. His bank accounts were frozen, his reputation destroyed, and federal charges loomed. The weight of consequences crushed down on him as he sat in his car across from his seized cafe, watching military police conduct their investigation. Through bleary eyes, he observed Colonel Marissa Hartwell's specially equipped vehicle pull into the parking lot. She had returned for a follow-up inspection, her wheelchair smoothly deploying from the vehicle as she prepared to enter the building. The sight of her triggered something dark inside Preston's mind. She did this to me, he muttered, gripping his steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. She destroyed everything. Preston reached into his glove compartment and pulled out a large kitchen knife he'd taken from the cafe days earlier. His hands trembled as he gripped the handle, his thoughts becoming increasingly chaotic. Inside the cafe, Marissa worked methodically with her team, documenting violations and preparing evidence for prosecution. Security cameras tracked their movements as they gathered documentation that would seal Preston's fate. The overcharging scheme appears systematic, one investigator reported, showing Marissa a stack of receipts. He specifically targeted military families during peak hours. The security officer monitoring the cameras noticed movement at the rear service entrance. Ma'am, we have an unauthorized entry, he announced, reaching for his radio. "Subject appears to be Preston Goldwater." Preston had used his old keys to slip in through the kitchen, his movements erratic as he clutched the knife. Security footage captured his disheveled appearance, wrinkled clothes, unwashed hair, wild eyes reflecting his deteriorating mental state. "Colonel Hartwell," he called out, his voice cracking with barely controlled rage, "you had no right to do this to me!" The investigation team turned to face him, immediately spotting the weapon. 2 military police officers moved to protect Marissa, but she remained calm, her years of combat experience evident in her measured response. "Mr. Goldwater, you're only making things worse for yourself," Marissa stated firmly, maintaining eye contact while subtly positioning her wheelchair for maximum maneuverability. "Put down the knife." "Worse?" Preston laughed hysterically, waving the knife. "How could anything be worse? You've already destroyed my life, my business, my reputation. Everything's gone." The security cameras continued recording as Preston advanced, the knife gleaming under fluorescent lights. Military police drew their weapons, creating a tense standoff in the cafe where just days ago, Preston had discriminated against the very woman he now threatened. "You did this to yourself, Mr. Goldwater," Marissa replied calmly, her steady voice a sharp contrast to his instability. "Your choices led to these consequences. The discrimination, the fraud, the theft from military families, those were your decisions." Preston's face contorted with rage. "I built this place. You had no right to take it." He lunged forward suddenly, the knife slashing through the air where Marissa had been moments before. Her tactical training kicked in as she smoothly maneuvered her wheelchair aside, avoiding the attack. Military police responded instantly, but Preston's erratic movements put everyone at risk. He swung the knife wildly, forcing investigators to take cover behind tables and counters. The security footage captured every moment as civil violations escalated into serious criminal behavior. "Last warning, Mr. Goldwater," called out one officer, weapon trained on Preston. "Drop the weapon or we will use force." Instead of complying, Preston charged toward Marissa again. "You pretended to be homeless. You tricked me." The knife came dangerously close as Marissa executed another defensive maneuver, her wheelchair's responsiveness saving her from serious injury. "I never pretended to be anything," Marissa responded, maintaining her composure even under direct threat. "You saw what you wanted to see, and that prejudice has now led you to attempted assault with a deadly weapon." Preston's next lunge proved to be his last. Military police tackled him from behind, the knife clattering across the floor as they secured his arms. The same cafe where he had once exercised discriminatory power now witnessed his complete surrender to violent desperation. "Preston Goldwater, you're under arrest," announced the lead officer, securing handcuffs while reading Miranda rights. "Add attempted assault with a deadly weapon and threatening a federal officer to your charges." Throughout the confrontation, security cameras had captured every moment. The footage would now be added to the mounting evidence against Preston, his violent attack transforming what began as civil violations into serious criminal charges. As officers led Preston away, his shoulders slumped in defeat, the reality of his situation finally seeming to sink in. His discrimination against a disabled veteran had triggered an investigation that exposed his fraud, and his inability to accept responsibility had now led to violent criminal behavior. The investigation team regrouped, shaken but professional. They documented the incident while Marissa continued her inspection, refusing to let the attack interrupt her duties. The security footage would provide crucial evidence for additional charges, ensuring Preston faced consequences for every violation, from discrimination to attempted assault. Colonel Marissa Hartwell watched Preston's erratic movements with the calculated focus of a combat veteran. Despite the knife in his trembling hands, she saw more than just the weapon. She observed his poor stance, his telegraphed intentions, and most importantly, his complete lack of tactical awareness. "You ruined everything!" Preston screamed, lunging forward with the kitchen knife. Marissa's wheelchair responded instantly to her practiced touch, pivoting smoothly to avoid his wild swing. 25 years of military service had taught her that position was everything in combat, whether standing or seated. She deliberately placed herself between Preston and the investigating officers, drawing his attention while simultaneously creating space for them to move to safer positions. "Mr. Goldwater," she commanded in her authoritative colonel's voice, "you're only adding federal assault charges to your existing violations." Preston's next attack came from the side, but Marissa had anticipated it. Her wheelchair's maneuverability, enhanced by countless hours of practice, allowed her to slide backward while simultaneously rotating. The knife sliced through empty air as Preston stumbled off balance. "Ma'am, we can handle this," one of the military police officers called out, weapon drawn. "Hold your positions," Marissa ordered, her tactical mind already 3 moves ahead. "He's more likely to harm someone if we escalate with firearms." Her eyes never left Preston as she spoke, tracking his increasingly desperate movements. The security cameras continued recording as Preston circled, his business suit now sweat-stained and disheveled. "You don't understand," he snarled. "This business was everything to me." "And protecting veterans is everything to me," Marissa responded calmly, subtly adjusting her position to keep herself between Preston and the others. Her hands remained steady on her wheelchair's controls, treating them as naturally as any other tactical equipment. Preston charged again, this time with a downward stabbing motion. It was the opening Marissa had been waiting for. As he committed to the attack, she executed a precise sideways movement that her years of wheelchair expertise had perfected. The momentum of Preston's missed strike threw him off balance, and Marissa seized the opportunity. In one fluid motion, she caught his knife arm with a practiced grip she'd maintained from her combat training days. Using his own forward momentum against him, she twisted his wrist sharply while her wheelchair pivoted, forcing Preston to either release the knife or suffer a broken arm. The kitchen knife clattered to the floor as Preston yelped in pain. Before he could recover, Marissa had him in a joint lock that her seated position actually made more effective. She had leverage while he was awkwardly bent over, his arm trapped at an angle that prevented escape without risking injury. "Weapon secured," she called out calmly. "Move in for arrest." The military police officers rushed forward, quickly securing Preston with handcuffs, while Marissa maintained the hold. One officer kicked the knife well away from reach, while another began reciting Preston's Miranda rights. "You are under arrest for assault with a deadly weapon, making terrorist threats against federal officials, and attacking a federal officer," the lead officer announced, securing the handcuffs firmly. Throughout the takedown, the cafe's security systems had captured every detail. Multiple camera angles recorded Preston's attack, Marissa's defensive maneuvers, and the final disarming sequence that proved her tactical capabilities remained sharp as ever. "I want this footage preserved and copied immediately," Marissa instructed one of her investigators. "Document everything, including his statements about targeting me specifically." As Preston was led away by authorities, his previous arrogance had completely crumbled. The man who had once discriminated against Marissa based on her wheelchair now had first-hand experience of her continued combat effectiveness. The investigation team gathered around Marissa, their respect evident in their expressions. "That was incredible, Colonel," one young officer admitted. "The way you controlled the situation." "Combat effectiveness isn't about how many limbs you have," Marissa responded, straightening her Purple Heart pin, which had shifted slightly during the confrontation. "It's about using your training, adapting to your circumstances, and protecting others when threats arise." The security footage would later become a key piece of evidence in Preston's prosecution, showing his clear intent to harm federal officers and his specific targeting of Marissa. More importantly, it documented how a disabled veteran had protected her entire team through skill, courage, and tactical thinking that no physical limitation could diminish. As the investigation team returned to their duties, Marissa took a moment to examine the kitchen knife that now lay secured in an evidence bag. The weapon that Preston had intended to use against her would instead serve as proof of his violent escalation from discrimination to attempted assault. "Let's complete our inspection," she directed her team, already refocused on their original mission. This incident doesn't change our responsibility to document every violation and protect every veteran's rights. The cafe's security cameras continued recording as Marissa led her team back to work, her wheelchair moving with the same precision she'd demonstrated during combat. She had proven once again that her strength came not from physical abilities alone, but from the unshakable spirit of a soldier dedicated to serving others. The federal courthouse buzzed with anticipation as Colonel Marissa Hartwell positioned her wheelchair at the witness stand. Her Purple Heart pin caught the morning light streaming through tall windows, a quiet reminder of the sacrifices that had led to this moment. Preston Goldwater sat at the defendant's table, his expensive suit now wrinkled and his posture defeated. "Colonel Hartwell," the federal prosecutor began, "please share with the court your perspective on Mr. Goldwater's systematic discrimination against veterans." Marissa adjusted her microphone, her steady gaze taking in the packed courtroom. Among the observers, she noticed Jack, the young Iraq veteran who had witnessed the Café incident. His presence reminded her that this hearing wasn't just about one man's crimes, it was about every veteran fighting invisible battles. "Your Honor," Marissa began, her voice carrying the weight of both authority and compassion, "I'm not here seeking revenge against Mr. Goldwater. I'm here because every veteran deserves dignity, respect, and the services they've earned through their sacrifice." She detailed the systematic fraud discovered during the investigation, the inflated prices charged to military families, the misused funds meant for veteran discounts, and the pattern of discrimination against disabled service members. "When Mr. Goldwater saw my wheelchair, he saw weakness," Marissa continued. "What he failed to see was the strength it takes to adapt and continue serving others after sacrifice. Every day, veterans face battles that most civilians never witness, from physical challenges to the invisible wounds of PTSD. Jack shifted in his seat, his expression softening as Marissa spoke about the daily struggles veterans endure. She had noticed his reluctance to seek help during their first encounters after the Café incident, recognizing in him the same pride and uncertainty she had once faced. "The greatest disservice we can do to our veterans is to treat them as victims rather than the warriors they are," Marissa testified. "Mr. Goldwater's actions didn't just violate federal contracts, they violated the trust of every service member who deserves support during their transition to civilian life." The judge, a Vietnam-era veteran himself, nodded in understanding as Marissa described her vision for transforming the seized Café into a veteran resource center. "We have an opportunity to turn this place of discrimination into a Marissacon of hope," she explained, "a place where veterans can find not just services, but understanding and community." Preston's shoulders slumped further as Marissa outlined the extensive evidence against him, the security footage, financial records, witness statements, and his final violent confrontation that had escalated his crimes from fraud to assault. After Marissa's testimony, the judge delivered his verdict. "Mr. Goldwater, your actions demonstrate a complete disregard for those who have served this nation. I hereby sentence you to 5 years in federal prison with a lifetime ban from government contracting." But it was what happened after the hearing that truly demonstrated the power of transforming injustice into purpose. Jack approached Marissa as she left the courthouse, his military Marissa-ing evident despite his civilian clothes. "Colonel," he said, "your testimony in there, it helped me understand I'm not alone in this fight." Marissa smiled warmly. "None of us are alone, Jack. That's exactly what I hope to prove with the new Veteran Resource Center." Over coffee at a nearby diner, one that welcomed all customers with respect, Marissa and Jack began planning what would become the Veterans Supporting Veterans Mentorship Program. Jack shared his struggles with PTSD and his initial reluctance to seek help, while Marissa spoke openly about her own journey of adaptation after losing her legs. "The program will pair experienced veterans with those newly transitioning to civilian life," Marissa explained, sketching out their vision on a napkin. "We'll provide peer support, career guidance, and most importantly, understanding from those who've walked the same path." Jack's eyes lit up with purpose for the first time since returning from Iraq. We could help veterans navigate the benefit system, find mental health resources, even create job opportunities. Within months, the former Goldwater Café transformed into a bustling veteran resource center. The space that had once excluded disabled veterans now welcomed service members of all abilities. Where Preston had once posted discriminatory signs, walls now displayed resources for PTSD support, job training programs, and veteran services. The mentorship program became the heart of the center's mission. Jack, who had once been skeptical about seeking help, now served as a peer counselor for other veterans struggling with PTSD. His own journey from isolation to purpose inspired others to reach out for support. Marissa watched with quiet satisfaction as the center flourished. Veterans who had once felt forgotten found community and purpose. Military families discovered resources and understanding. The place that had been a symbol of discrimination became a model for veteran support centers across the country. One afternoon, as Marissa led a training session for new mentors, she caught sight of her reflection in the center's window. Her Purple Heart pin still gleamed on her lapel, but now it was joined by the logo of the Veterans Supporting Veterans program, a simple design showing one hand helping another rise. "Our strength isn't just in what we endured," she told the group of mentors, which included Jack. "It's in how we use our experiences to lift others up. Every veteran's story matters, and every battle they face deserves recognition and support." The transformation was complete. Preston's discrimination had led not to bitterness, but to a program that would help veterans for generations to come. Marissa's sacrifice, both in combat and in facing down prejudice, continued to protect and serve others, proving that true strength lies not in standing alone, but in standing together. As the training session ended, Jack approached Marissa with news of 3 more veterans joining the mentorship program. His own transformation from isolated warrior to confident mentor reflected the center's broader mission, turning pain into purpose and struggle into strength. "You know, Colonel," Jack said, "when I first saw what happened at the café, I thought it was just another example of how civilians don't understand us. But you showed me it was an opportunity to create real change." Marissa nodded, understanding that her greatest victory wasn't in Preston's punishment, but in the lasting impact of their new mission. The center had become more than just a building. It was a testament to the enduring spirit of those who serve, and a promise that no veteran would have to face their battles alone. Thanks for tuning in. These stories remind us that life is more than headlines. It's about heartlines. Subscribe if you want more moments that make you pause, feel, and reflect.